All right. So next mailbag question's all about private equity. What misconceptions do trade business owners have about private equity? One is the idea that they're going to get top dollar from private equity. That's not necessarily true. There are some private equity firms where the strategy is not to get top dollar. They're trying to get top value, but pay as little as possible. So they're able to achieve this by, strong knowledge of the tax code, of, different ways to finance the deal. So that's kind of part of their strategy too, right? But some of it, and I've seen this is where, oh, you're not getting the price that you want from folks, but you really need to sell. I'll offer you half the cash that you want. So that's not always true all the time. So that's can be a misconception is that private equity is always going to give you the biggest dollar. The other thing is that, private equity is buying up my industry. Yeah, sure. But that doesn't mean they want to buy you. If you are an owner and you're out, I would say chances are if you're an owner and you're out there every day on a job site in the trades, chances are that private equity may not be your buyer because they want something that is kind of running itself more. Now, if you're more of the manager, you can still be working every day, but it's kind of like if you're doing project manager kind of stuff, that you may be too small for a private equity target. Even their platform businesses probably want to have like a major player within a market for them to be serious. So that's kind of one misconception is that private equity, I see this in roofing a lot. They're in that industry. They're not buying up everybody. Does receiving an email from private equity mean the firm is ready to make an attractive offer? No, receiving an email from private equity doesn't even indicate they know who you are. It just knows that it just means that you're in a database somewhere. I mean, I'm kind of guilty of this too. I do a lot of outreach to business owners. At least for me as a broker, I'm a little bit, agnostic at times of, okay, like if you are a business in this area, I'd love to talk to you. And I really would. Uh, some private equity buyers are reaching out to folks and they don't even know who that business is or what they do. Um, it's just a business and they're just casting a wide net. So that's definitely a misconception. Definitely, a misconception that, oh, like they say they want to buy my business. Like I have buyers lining up. Again, those buyers may not know who you are. And once they start qualifying aspects of your business, they may just be like, oh, this is not what we're looking for. I mean, some of them may really be qualified and really actually be interested in your business. I don't want to say that like everyone's just like sending you email for no reason, but they, often can't distinguish, within an HVAC vertical how big you are. A database may just say 1 to 5 million or 1 to 10 million, and who knows kind of from, that reasoning to reach out to you where you are from their perspective, they may not know. Oh, I like this one. What misconceptions do private equity buyers have about local trade businesses? I'll expand this to be what misconceptions do buyers have about the trades? Because a lot of buyers, when we're like, oh, all these people are interested in me, a lot of times we're talking about people. If you're in HVAC, we're probably talking about people outside of HVAC, in roofing outside of roofing, in pest control outside of pest control. One misconception that they have is like, oh, I'll just hire a manager and I'll run the business. And I have a big business brain and I'm going to blow this business up from the business side. I mean, anyone who runs a business knows that that is a lot easier said than done. And so, one misconception that either private equity, just other buyers have is that, they can just kind of not be in the business all the time, especially if it's a smaller business. And if it's a larger business, then, that you have already done that work to grow it. So I think that's kind of a big misconception. Look, being a business owner, it stinks, right? Like there's other ways to make money, but sometimes that's just not what we want to do, or the position that we're in, it's a lot of work. And they don't want to think that it's a lot of work. The other thing that there's a misconception of buyers, private equity or otherwise, about the trade businesses, it's that they think you have these technicians, that's great, but they don't understand how hard it is to keep those technicians, to get them, to train them. I think especially in private equity, they think, "Oh, we're private equity. We can do all these things and we can make the business and we can professionalize it." Those techs, they don't professionalize the business if you want to keep some really great techs in it, right? Like they work there because they like working with the owner. They have a skill. They can go other places. Like if you just want to turn something into a big box shop, like an auto shop, and you're like buying auto shops and you think you're just going to be able to like make technicians a commodity, you're for a rude awakening because those good techs are going to leave. And then the thing that you bought, which is probably a high reputation local business, that's going to go down. So now you just have a generic brand, and that's reliability for some customers. I think on the technician side, they're like, I don't get the attention that I used to from the owner. So that's kind of a big risk that I don't think a lot of people factor into. And this is where I actually like individual buyers. Because if you're a small business owner and you're selling to private equity, that can be tough to tell, especially in the trades technicians, like, oh yeah, this, platform buyer is going to treat you as well as I do. I who live in your neighborhood and know your families. But an individual buyer can come in and make the case like, hey, I also care about you. So that's where I kind of like my individual buyers as well. They kind of, that is a stronger argument. And I think they have less risk than some of your bigger buyers in those cases. As long as they're not coming from maybe like if they're coming from like an honestly, I hate to say this, but because I know there's people from investment banking watching this, that may be the worst situation where you're an individual who's not run a business before and you don't have, you're not used to working with technicians and people in the trades. That can be a recipe for a learning curve that's bad for the business and some interpersonal conflict. Sorry. Will the owner receive all of the purchase price in cash at closing? Yeah, it really depends. They'll receive a lot of cash in closing because it'll just be cash from the buyer, cash from the bank. And then it depends on, like, I think then the two big things of like what's left that wouldn't be cash is if you are rolling equity. So you could say, hey, I'm not going to sell 100% of the business. This private equity firm or this buyer is offering me to roll equity. So that means that, you know, they'll probably, the purchase will probably be an asset purchase. And then that means the buyer will create an LLC. That LLC will buy all the stuff in your LLC and your LLC will disappear. So if you're Auto Shop Biz, then LLC, then private equity or buyer biz LLC will buy all your stuff and then be doing business as auto business name, if that makes sense. So you could roll equity into the new company that owns all your assets and is doing business as you. That would effectively reduce the cash at close because you're not buying 100% of the price. You're just buying 90%, 95%. But where this is like really, if you sell to an individual, that may not be a great deal because now you just own 5% of what is this person doing with it, just running it the same way, some marginal growth. Not to say that individual buyers can't blow something up into literally Assurian is be one of those examples, but private equity, buyer offers you, a stake in, the new thing that they're building, they're bolting onto, and they will have a secondary sale event and they will sell this rolled up thing to somebody else. And that rolled up thing will be bigger with all this growth and capital put behind it to grow. And then you having rolled equity now own this newer, bigger thing, and then you may get another payday later on too. So for older owners, that may not be as attractive if you're like, yeah, 10 years from now, I'll sell it again and you'll make some more money. So that's kind of a decision for yourself. The second thing that may be less cash at closing is if you're seller financing. So you may just be the bank. Maybe it's because the business isn't as bankable, or maybe it's because it just is a vote of confidence and it reduces the price for the buyer, or at least the cash up front for the buyer. And so you may be the bank for like 5-10% of the deal. But for the most part, expect a lot of cash at the end. And then it becomes, expect a lot of cash at the end. It's just how much of it you keep depends on how much debt you're carrying in the business yourself. That's the main driver. How much cash you're going to take home is you're going to pay taxes. You're going to pay all your debts off for equipment, vehicles, anything else. If you took out then they have personal stuff. So if you took out like a HELOC, to support your business. Probably pay that off. Okay, let's see. So, a lot of questions about private equity. What does private equity normally expect the owner to do after closing? Private equity often expects the more often than maybe an individual buyer or a strategic buyer, a competitor buying you. Private equity will want you to kind of stay on as management for a little while, could be up to a year. So that can often be unattractive to sellers. But that's something that's negotiable. And if you're really like, I am going to sell to private equity and I don't want to stay in this business, you need to have a really good manager and you need to have your systems documented so you can hand that over to your general manager's manager and someone can run things for you. You'll still probably be asked to like have some sort of consulting agreement so that they can call you and say, "Hey, you've got to kind of tell me what's going on with this account or how does this work?" So, what question should an owner ask before agreeing to exclusivity with a buyer? And this is kind of in my bag of private equity questions. So I see this a lot. So private equity is pretty good, kind of similar to the way business brokers are about reaching out to owners and, you know, talking to them before they're actually, trying to sell a business or actively sourcing other buyers. Well, private equity really likes this because then they kind of control the pace of everything. If you're working with a broker and a broker talking to a private equity buyer as well as other buyers, the broker's going to try and move people through a process. Like you're either going to buy or you're not. Because sometimes what private equity will do, remember, and I said that, sometimes they're buying like a platform and then they're putting things into it. So they may come to a market. So say they come to Nashville and they want their HVAC platform roll up. They may look at you and say, it's a little small, but no one else is talking to them. So I'm going to keep talking to them. I'm going to keep asking them the questions. I'm going to slow drip this document, that document. I've seen businesses locally talk to a private equity firm for like a year, like, oh, we're under contract. Man, you're under a house after 3 months of talking to private equity and they're not like you're not drafting a purchase agreement, so they can slow roll it because then what I see is they are looking for something else to buy at the same time to then outlay capital at the same time and be like, okay, well, this one thing is not big enough, but if I find this one thing plus another thing of equal size or greater size, I mush them together and buy it at the same time, and now I've got a big market player. Or maybe they're like, maybe they're not trying to combine you, or maybe just the second choice, and they're looking for something better. And if they can't get what they want, then they'll settle for you. So that's what is even the question? I just kind of went on my high horse about how they kind of drag people along. Yeah, how long to ask for exclusivity? Sorry, 30 days. They should be able to get through what they need in 30 days if they're serious. Now, I often see like 30 days is, a private equity firm can make that work. You as a buyer may not be able to keep up, especially if you're not working with a broker who's helping organize things and probably has a lot of the documentation ahead of time. Don't be surprised if at day 28, 29, you're like, I need more time. You can extend it. But I think 30 days is a good marker of like, let's just do 30 days. And then if you need to extend another 2 weeks, and then you can keep doing that. But, I would not go under exclusivity with a firm that's saying, oh, well, we don't, just kind of undetermined exclusivity until we close this deal, have a timeline. And then just because you're not exclusive with, this is true in business, but not in life, just because you're exclusive with somebody, so this is true in, business, not so much in life. It's that you can be non-exclusive and keep talking to somebody, and that's fine. Someone will keep doing that. Though someone will engage in that relationship, you're just basically saying like, look, it's just taking you so long to get through everything and not close. I'm going to keep talking to other people. And I think that's totally fair. Like, just because you're non-exclusive doesn't mean the person that you're talking to can't keep working on that deal. It just means that, hey, they might lose it. They've had their exclusivity period. You're moving on. They don't have rights to the deal. How should the owner compare the highest offer with the best offer? Okay, so this is a really smart question. The highest offer isn't always the best offer. It all goes back to, and this is a conversation I have with sellers, like, it's kind of like one of the first things I asked. I was like, why do you want to sell? And I want to know a little bit more than, because I just don't want to do this anymore. Well, what are we trying to accomplish with this sale? Because if it's just like, I just want, like, if I just don't care what happens to the business, I don't care who buys it, I just want a big payday, then the highest offer is the best offer. If you're like, I want, the business to go on, I don't like, I want to make sure all my relationships are good and my customers are taken care of, then vet the buyer for their ability to take care of your people and your customers. If it's, I need this to be done quickly, I can't be messing around. Well, maybe the lower offer with the buyer that's like, I am going to close and I'm giving every indication that I'm going to close on time. That may be the better offer. Like if it's a difference of like 200, 300,000, and this person's like, have pre-qual from a bank. I've bought businesses before. This is exactly the price that I want. I'm not worried about some issues around like inventory or work in progress. I just need to verify before I buy. That may be better than someone who's like, I got here's like all the money you want, but I got all these questions and I'm super skeptical about everything. Well, you know what? That person's going to take a while to go through diligence. They're going to really check everything, but that's fine. But then they're going to negotiate you down on every issue that they find. That's gonna drag it out, and if speed is important to you, then that high offer may not be someone who's actually gonna close, and that may not actually be the highest offer by the time you get to close. Then you're like, you might get pretty close to closing, and they're, like, negotiating down on everything that they find. You're like, "You know what? I had no thanks. We've been doing this for 35, 45 days, but I'm out because there was an offer beforehand that was, at the time, lower, but is now better." So it really goes back to, why are you doing this? And does this buyer offer you the chance to accomplish the why you're trying to do this?